In this video, I originally wanted to talk about the action-adventure genre, but I can barely find any games that fall under this category. With that said, there are a lot of arcade games that I have noticed that would be classified in this genre. Just like the last video, the top tier will introduce attributes that all subgenres will contain, and the subgenres will introduce new attributes in the lower tier. This is called inheritance. Keep in mind that the subgenres introduce new attributes different from the other subgenres, and what they all have in common is the genre attributes. As per usual, I'll talk about some concepts and definitions related to gaming, either unmodified or terms used from generation to generation since its creation. To reiterate, I basically want to be shifting people's baselines from what people are used to something that can actually incorporate all types of games, since I believe the genres generally don't make sense to what is out there now. On top of that, should be an important part of reviewing video games. Whether you have your own consistent criteria or not, I'm just the type of person that tries to be consistent, that will incorporate past, present, and future video game designs, and many times it means shifting the baseline of what people may hold to today. Without getting too deep, shifting baseline is something that people use as a foundational basis of comparing one concept to another that usually, in my opinion, will cause a lot of controversy if certain individuals hold certain concepts strongly. Even if my genres won't be the standard, I wanted to at least spark a standard that will not only hold for today, but will hold for the future by redefining people's baselines as a point of reference. A good example of people attempting to shift the baseline is DMC, Devil May Cry 2013 reboot, Tomb Raider 2013 reboot, and Infamous 2 original character designs. In generally, it should be used as a reference point for comparison than a bias to hold against a concept that has potential to be more useful than what people currently hold it against. With all that said, I'll get into the arcade genre that may contain a lot of changes that people may not have suspected with such a simple genre. The first concept I want to emphasize is depth versus complexity. The more complex the game mechanics, the more the game is changing the player's playing habits. The more deep the mechanics in relation to complex levels or environments, extending those game mechanics, the more the game is changing how the player thinks. Depth is what the player can do with a single game mechanic that usually entails complex environments, while complexity is referring to the number of mechanics the player has at their disposal. This basically means if the video game has detailed graphics, closing the aesthetic distance, the more complex the game mechanics needs to be, contrary to having few mechanics with complex environments. If a developer decides to mismatch these concepts, even if the player does not know game design, the player will feel limited with the choices presented to them. With highly detailed environments can fool the player to thinking they can do more with the game mechanics presented, and will most likely trying to interact with the environment when they cannot. A perfect example of doing this wrong is The Order 1886, a beautiful game, but the environments have limited interactions. Item and/or pickup is any kind of tool, tangible or intangible, that has a purpose not limited to is adding to the lore and/or helping the player progression in the universe created. Examples include but not limited to a key, puzzle pieces, batteries, parts, or video clips that are related to the universe created. Power-ups, power-downs, or in-game economics are similar to pickups, but with power-ups, the player uses them directly or indirectly affecting the player's mechanics and or abilities that can have limitations generally controlled usage, usually based on genre design. There are different types, not limited to are defensives, offensives, and or chaotics, or sometimes called hazards. Examples include but not limited to weapons, bullets, health packs, invulnerability, X-ray vision, and or transportation in certain circumstances. Abilities, what the controlled character can do without the need of power-ups and or other enhancements in the universe created. Leveling up, when the controlled character gains permanent abilities to be used as part of the controlled character's natural abilities that have a tendency to enhance abilities already obtained and or have through power-ups. Depending on the type of leveling system implemented, will generally correlate to the controlled character's abilities to power-ups. This is very similar to what RPGs requires of the player, but there's way more to it to be considered an RPG. Primary processes, Game mechanics are the rules or algorithms of interaction and or movement that control how most of the environment is designed. For the most part, this level of interaction can be defined by how the player controls or performs certain actions in the game than the action itself. An example of this would be in a shooter. The player can be required to know how to move around in the environment as well as aiming while shooting versus just worrying about shooting. Secondary processes, game mechanics, are the rules or algorithms of interaction and or movement that either breaks up the primary processes and or works to support the primary processes. The primary processes can indirectly influence how the secondary processes can be performed. So if the primary processes are about what should be done, then how this process can follow suit. Example, a cover system. Another way of explaining the correlations of primary processes and secondary processes is the difference between functions and features. A function in the context of a system is what the system can do. For example, a smartphone has a camera process, identifying what the phone can do. A feature in the context of a system is what a single function on the system can do. So going back to my example that the smartphone has a camera process, can have different components or abilities like zoom in, filters, or image editing. Now using this to gaming, think of driving in GTA a function or activity that the player can do within the game, and the features would be the controls of the vehicles in the game. But with gaming, it's more complicated. Since a game has a system, and a game can have a system within a system, a secondary process can be a function itself to a degree, keeping in mind how an activity is performed in tandem of the activity itself will determine what genre the game falls in. Generally, what I like to call secondary processes are game mechanic elements of a genre into another genre, then a direct correlation of functions and features metaphor between the core mechanics and secondary mechanics. Now with that in mind, a secondary process in my eyes is usually another function than a feature. In the end, it's up to the designer of how they see things, because using an example of a cover system, to me a cover system can entail a whole slew of features than being a feature of a function. Hopefully that didn't confuse anyone, but the simple explanation is that the primary processes is usually the core mechanics of the genre, and the secondary is usually the borrowed mechanics from another genre, but not the core mechanics of that genre. The primary processes can have functions and features, so can the secondary processes. It's just the nature of the processes that will determine the genre the game falls in. Game state is when the player changes the context of the situation and or the game changes the situation to allow different control schemes to take over and or options. This is including but not limited to lock-on targeting, driving, pausing, and or toggling. Genres by game mechanic. All genres by the video game mechanics have these three basic attributes that are basic tests to meet objectives, parameters focusing on specific means to successfully pass a test, and architecture being symmetrical as possible, even if it appears to be asymmetrical. Declarative decisions, instruction mechanics, are actions that are more about what should be done without how it should be done. Generally, the explicit correlation to what should be done in context of the objective and or want of the player. Procedural decisions, performance mechanics, are actions that are detailing how something should be done that is generally implicit because it's how someone sees something from experience and or advanced knowledge to solve. This is combining knowing what to do in tandem of how to do. Challenge versus test. Challenges are about one's abilities or resources in a demanding undertaking, while a test is generally used as a form of assessment and or tutorial. Difficulty, the capacity of mastering the abilities and or resources used to overcome a challenge. Interactive medium is an algorithm-filled environment to create experiences either from fact and or fiction. Video games versus virtual toys. A video game creates purpose for the player to play, while a toy is something that the player has an interest in naturally and creates their own purposes, with both falling under an entertainment. I want to elaborate on this concept and that this is the difference between what most simulation games are to what a video game is. A true simulation game will try to replicate real life, and that is often with no real objective besides random occurrences. Typical games that fall under this category is Sims, train simulators, and or pet games like Nintendogs. This can entail taking care of simulated life forms, creating the game, and what many strategy games take from, but made into a game. This is when people in the gaming community will slowly start calling video games interactive experiences, when in reality they're including a separate section of interactive medium. If this were to be in a tree diagram, interactive medium would be the top tier, the second tier would be entertainment and education, for example. Underneath entertainment, there can be video games and virtual toys. Whatever name you want to decide to call the non-gaming interactive medium classifications under entertainment does not matter. It's the fact that the design exists, and we'll be talking about the same thing. To reiterate, this genre series are only focused on video games and not virtual toys, a name that I have given it for the meantime to explain a reclassification of video games, not virtual toys. Arcade genre. Attributes. Games generally designed for a single player and or co-op, having one or a combination of the following: unlimited amount of resources and or game economics, unlimited use of mechanics or player progression, and constraints to enforce difficulty. So with unlimited amount of resources and game economics, examples would be bullets. Unlimited use of mechanics or player progression, an example would be like reversing time, combos, counters. And examples of constraints to enforce difficulty can have three types: economics, environmental, and arbitrary. Arbitrary is like something like a time limitation. The third attribute is environment. Confined and traditional. Confined is an arena-like environment. Traditional is a continuous environment. And the fourth attribute is the end user skill set is reflected through the avatar and or object. Primary processes can be controlled by the game to a certain degree, can be unlimited and limited. Secondary processes can be controlled by the game and can be unlimited, limited, or non-existent. Distinction. The focus of these games is that they are more about the single-player experience and or campaign that can entail co-op in an environment confined or not, with an unlimited mechanic or constraint usually influencing the player's pacing. Common challenges: defeating waves of enemies, algorithms of enemies, timing of processes. These are games that are action-based but have a tendency to be more obscure with their game mechanics. The best way to think of these games is that they are single-player party games, in a sense. I would go as far to say as most games that are classified as action-adventure with the old system will most likely fall into this genre. This genre is defined by game mechanics like any other genre, because for the most part people will use the term arcade to describe a video game that was in an arcade cabinet as an arcade game. What I did here was somewhat took the ideology of an arcade game and applied it to a video game in a household. And what kind of experiences would that create? Action attributes resembles action game mechanics that can be utilized in a single process, having combat, platforming, and survival mechanics. Examples: Pac-Man 1980, Zombie Highway, Temple Run, Jetpack Joyride, Sin Mora, Winback 2, Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, Sunset Overdrive, Bulletstorm, Alan Wake, State of Emergency, Metroid Prime Trilogy, Exion Verge, and Mega Man Legends 1. Pac-Man would be a type of survival game where 90% of the time the player is vulnerable to die with a one-hit kill, and the power-up pellets only turn the tide for a limited time frame. Super Mario World, this may be odd for some people, but the reason why Super Mario World is here is because the time constraints on the levels. Even though for the most part players won't notice, having a time limit there actually affects level design, because that means the game takes away certain elements of exploration. This will be the difference between most Castlevania games versus Super Mario World. Having the time constraint creates a certain paradigm of play. Sunset Overdrive, this was misclassified with the action genre video because I combined many action games into the one genre, and when separating the genres, I completely forgot about the arcade genre. In my defense, essentially the game is still an action game, but it's an action game that is designed in a certain way that focuses on certain aspects of play. The main reason the game belongs here is because of the combos they have in the game. Metroid Prime Trilogy. I can pretty much say with confidence that all Metroid games follow this rule, but since I only have played Metroid Prime Trilogy, I want to stick to the games I know for sure fall here. The main reason here is that the game has unlimited resources, which is the suit's gun. When looking at games like this, I start thinking, how does a game like Metal Slugs would look like in fully 3D environment? The answer to the question is games like Metroid Prime, Mega Man Legends, and Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider is more of an adventure game because since the player cannot run out of ammunition, I have to classify it as an arcade game than an adventure game. Lastly, Alan Wake. This was originally classified as an action survival game, but I removed it because of the unlimited resource of the flashlight. That is basically the only reason, and on top of that, the game does not make the player the prey or vulnerable enough to avoid confrontation.
Nilin, you must run down Riddlehead and steal the access protocols to the conception queue. There's good news. This time he's on foot.
And the bad news?
His memory is splintered. He's practically a leaper. You must act quickly.
How do I catch him?
He's headed for the main security post found on the 103rd floor. Use the freight lift to intercept him.
Manual unlock activated. Please mind the platform edge during descent.
Action Adventure attribute. These games have puzzles, exploration, and or various challenges beyond precision and accuracy to progress through the game. Examples: God of War 1 to 4, Devil May Cry 1 to 4, and Tomb Raider 1 to 8. God of War 1 to 4. A lot of these games are classified as action adventure, and for the most part I can see why people would. In some cases I don't see it. There will be an action adventure game with an explanation of saying it's mixed with adventure with action, which would mean puzzle solving would be the main part of the level design. What I find is that the open world games will be classified almost automatically as action adventure, like GTA games or Assassin's Creed games. But bear in mind, I have not played all the Assassin's Creed games to date. I do collect video games, but I tend to collect games that either interest me or have an interesting design despite the popularity and overall reception. Without rambling, games that have crazy combos in a seamless environment would be the equivalent of a 2D side-scroller, with periodically fixed environments or arena-type levels. Again, not all 3D beat-em-ups will fall here, since the new attribute is solving puzzles, so games like State of Emergency is not an action-adventure game nor an arcade action-adventure game, but an arcade action game.
Thor.
The Norse god of thunder. Whatever are you doing down here in Niflheim? According to the Eddas, Thor needed special iron gauntlets to wield his mighty hammer Mjolnir. Could it be? Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was powerful enough to level mountains. But how does all this relate to Avalon?
Put your hands on your head. Turn around. Slowly.
I don't suppose you'd be open to bribery, would you?
Traditional attribute, real-world games that are replicated digitally. Examples, pinball. These are the types of games that are usually board games of some sort, but will entail a single person. I won't have much to say about this subgenre, but it just must have the genre attributes to fall here. That's it for this video. Terminator TX3 out.
Welcome to the Sorcerer's Lair.
Come on!
Leaving so soon?
All locked.
Take my hand! The secret passage may save you!
Leaving so soon?
Oh, I hate spiders! Spiders? No match for my slingshot! Where could Whisper be?
leaving so soon?
Magnificent!